Mr Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the motion as on the order paper, and I should like to draw yours and the Chamber's attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests, my position as Chair of the PCS Parliamentary Group and as an active trade unionist. I should also like to thank the fellow members from all parties represented in this House for their support in securing this debate, and to the Backbench Business Committee for granting it. Mr Deputy Speaker, before I move on to the substance of the debate, I hope you'll allow me to wish Calvin Thomas well on what is his last day of work in this place. Calvin arrived in the House in 1989 before becoming a doorkeeper in 2000, with 9 years in the members' lobby and 7 years in the special lobby. I know many of my colleagues are grateful for all the help that he has given us and our family members and guests over the years, and we wish him well as he returns to his beloved island of St Helena. Mr Deputy Speaker, on the 12th of November 2015, HMRC published departmental plans for the future structure of HMRC, which they have titled Building Our Future. It is important to note that these plans have been issued by the Department rather than via any ministerial statement. This is, we believe, unsatisfactory, given the extent of the impact of the plans, which include the closure of 90% of its office network and staffing reductions of thousands of posts. In 2005, HMRC employed approximately 105,000 members of staff. In 2016, the figure currently stands at approximately 58,000, almost a 50% reduction. The Building Our Future plans seek to close almost all of the 160 plus HMRC offices and to move to 13 regional hubs and 4 specialist areas. They seek to make further job cuts to bring the headcount down a further 8,000 to 50,000, although some information has also suggested the intention is to reduce staffing to 41,000. The timeline for these proposals is in 2 phases, with HMRC proposing that the first phase of 21 offices to be vacated by March 2017, with the second phase of 27 office closures to take place between June 2017 and March 2018. They propose that in future HMRC will be based in 13 large offices and 4 specialist sites, with some 95% of the remaining staff after the cuts will work. On the 16th of February, HMRC issued compulsory redundancy notices to 152 members of staff, 70% of whom are members of the Public and Commercial Services Trade Union. This is the biggest number of compulsory notices issued in a single instance by any UK civil service department. I'll give way that point.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way on this. He will be aware that currently 11 of the compulsory redundancy notices are imposed on constituents of mine who currently work at the Glenrothes HMRC office, which is scheduled to close in June of this year. When that closure was announced, the staff got all the same assurances that have been given to current members of staff. What the PCS have told me happened in practice was that their members, many of whom had given 30 and 40 years of dedicated service to the public, were made to feel as if they just didn't matter. Employees were asked to accept relocations that for part-time workers would have meant they spent longer commuting than they spent at work. Employees with care commitments were expected to work more than 2 hours away from their home for they might be called to in an emergency. And it was even claimed that the distances that they were told they would have to travel between Glenrothes and Edinburgh were taken on a straight line that was impossible to achieve unless they swam across the Firth of Forth. Has my honourable friend any reason to believe that the employees who are currently being threatened with redeployment or redundancy will be treated any better than my constituents have been treated in the past?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. Can I say, we'll call it an intervention. I think he's right to be concerned about some of the practices we're hearing about from trade union members based in HMRC and staff members in HMRC, where they're being pulled into one-to-one meetings and being denied trade union representation. And I have to say, if there's a meeting with a manager and an employee which discuss their future job prospects, I would expect the trade union to have access to those meetings, and they're not having access to those meetings. And perhaps the Minister can come on to that. I'm also going to come into other areas. I will do in a second. I'll also be explaining the travel times and some of those issues later on, but first I'll give way to the Honourable friend.
Giving way. It's my understanding from my experience as a trade union rep that when redundancies are announced that it's compulsory to consult with the trade unions and that the members of staff are entitled to have representation.
That is my experience too, and when I was a trade union rep, perhaps the Minister can clarify that point, because I do agree that that is a point that we do need to address, and I hope the Minister will do that. I'll give way to the Honourable.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he also recognise that some people are receiving redundancy notices by email, not even face-to-face, in whatever context?
Well, I think that's a very interesting point, given that yesterday we had a debate about e-balloting, the right of trade unions to access email for a trade union ballot, but it seems it's okay for a compulsory redundancy notice to be issued by electronic means. Perhaps the government will take that into account when it's discussing the trade union bill too. We believe that the HMRC and the government want to send a signal using the 152 staff facing compulsory redundancy to demonstrate exactly how they will go about the mass office closure arising from the building of future plan, and we find this unacceptable and not acting in good faith. We'll give way on that.
I thank my honourable friend for giving me, congratulate him and the others on securing this debate. Does he share my concern that a number of the arguments we were given in 2014 for Scotland remaining in the Union are beginning to unravel? We were told that separation shuts shipyards. We were told that our heavy industry, such as the steel industry, would be at risk. And we were told that a major benefit of the Union was the civil service employees that benefited from the United Kingdom and Scotland. And now it seems on all of those points the case is unravelling.
Absolutely.
Well, my honourable friend raises a fair point in that some workforces were told that offices would close if they voted for independence. Now, to be fair, workers in my experience, both in the shipyards and the HMRC, came to an individual choice in terms of the referendum. I don't think necessarily some of those scare stories were accepted by many parts of the workforce. But again, we see rhetoric being used around the Constitution that places will close, and it's not an independent Scotland that's closing those offices. We find is a Tory government. In preparing for today's debate, I came across a debate on the then inland revenue from over 30 years ago in the other place. Contribution from the former member for Sowerbury, Baron Houghton, a former chairman of the Public Accounts Committee and chair of the Inland Revenue Staff Association. And it stood out, because what he said then was the human factor is the ultimate right, and there is no substitute for it. No computers will deal with taxpayers who require consideration and attention, and to whom some measure of discretion or of consideration may be due. Those words are as appropriate today as they were in 1983. They would seem to me part of an ethos that all of us across parties should endorse as a cornerstone of public services. Sadly, those behind HMRC's Building Our Future are taking the wrecking ball to those foundations and demolishing not just the future of HMRC buildings, but hammering the staff, the taxpayer and the public. If they're allowed to proceed, towns and cities across these isles will be at the forefront of yet more ideological austerity. Hard-working and conscientious staff will once again be expected to clean up the mess, and taxpayers will foot the bill for the short-sightedness and the short-termism of successive governments and Treasury ministers. HMRC are not building a future, they are destroying it. 15 years ago, Inland Revenue and Customs and Excise combined had 701 offices across the country. We're being asked to accept today that the 13 centres proposed by HMRC could possibly replicate that kind of coverage. Mr Deputy Speaker, if there's anyone who believes that the citizens of Penrith can better be served by a supercentre in Manchester compared to Carlisle, or those in Portleithen from Edinburgh against Aberdeen, or the people of Penzance from Bristol rather than Redruth, we are asked to believe that the best interests of the taxpayer and of society are met in a system that has staff in Glasgow travelling halfway to Golspie to meet clients who have travelled halfway from Golspie to Glasgow, sitting down at some neutral location to discuss an individual's sensitive and confidential tax affairs. I am told One of these neutral locations is what can only be described as a hut in a public park. I'm told, and if I had not heard this with my own ears, I would not have believed it, that HMRC staff are advised to take a warm jumper and a bag of grit to these meetings during winter. In truth, Mr Deputy Speaker, a look at the latest staff satisfaction survey from HMRC unfortunately makes it all too easy to believe. It would make some informative bedtime reading for those behind this closure programme. Fully 2% of staff strongly agree with the statements, I feel change is managed well in HMRC.
2%.
And when changes are made in HMRC, they are usually for the better. Or the 6% who strongly agree that I would recommend HMRC as a great place to work. Or the 3% who strongly agree that HMRC as a whole is managed well. On measure after measure, time after time, staff at HMRC are demoralised, demotivated and depressed. I ask honourable members what other outcome in staff morale would come from the shuttering of office after office around the country. How enthused would anyone be knowing that in a matter of months your workplace is to be closed and yourself, your friends and your colleagues are to be relocated miles away? I rather suspect if those behind this scheme were to be told tomorrow that their palatial offices were to be shuffled off from London to Norwich, Peterborough or Harwich, our journey staff in these offices will be expected to do in reverse from next year, there may well be a murmur or two of discontent escaping from their lips.
Absolutely.
Staff are entitled to ask exactly why a government that invents catchphrase after catchphrase on regional policy, from the Northern Powerhouse to the Midlands Engine, is intent on such a centralising agenda. They may well ask why they're being shunted into sidings rather than provided an express service to their communities. I'm sure colleagues will later touch on the impact these closures will have on their own constituencies, so I'll not dwell too long on the specific towns and cities that will be hit and how hard they will be hit. But to see cities like... I'll give way now.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Well, he agrees it's not merely on a geographic basis that there is a loss of service, but there are specific services which are being abandoned. For example, HMRC has announced recently the abandonment of its valuation check service for SMEs, thus completely compromising employee share ownership schemes.
I'm aware of that and I hope to touch on that a little later on. I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. But to come back to the point, to see cities like Middlesbrough with the third highest unemployment rate in England, to see Bootle with nearly 3,000 already on the dole, to see cities like Derry with the highest unemployment rate of any constituency, to see these places on a list guaranteed to create job losses at HMRC and in the wider community is to see a plan that will, in the words of PCS, consciously increase unemployment in areas which are already employment black spots. Mr Deputy Speaker, I suspect the word Mapley may come up in the course of today's debate. Let me touch upon this. I referred earlier to over 700 offices formerly used by HMRC. Mapley Estate snapped up over 130 of these for their offshore property portfolio. After loading themselves up with debt in order to front up their side of this rotten charade with the then government, 84% of the funding Mapley obtained to acquire this lucrative contract came in the form of loans. But this shabby deal with a shabby company comes to an end in 2021. For the privilege of renting publicly built offices sold off for a song, HMRC will have the right to occupy buildings with leases based on market terms after that date. That is very generous of them. I commend the National Audit Office report into this deal in 2009. It is redolent with phrases such as the department has not achieved value for money, or the department did not fully appreciate the risks, or the department has not had strong processes to monitor the overall cost of the contract and whether it is achieving value for money. The Honourable Member for East Hampshire admitted in this House last year that the end life of the Mapley contracts represented a one-off opportunity to make this change to the estate footprint. This is part of the truth behind these closures. A PFI deal worth billions from the public purse, used to enrich a Bermuda domiciled corporate entity, with the public left with nothing at the end of 20 years except the right to sign a commercial lease. Mr Deputy Speaker, I will end in the words of a PCS member and HMRC employee, my constituent Bobby Young, who is chair of the PCS Revenue and Customs branch. Whilst my branch welcomes the news of a slight increase in jobs in Glasgow, we absolutely oppose it if it comes at the cost of jobs elsewhere. Communities from Bathgate to Bootle will be devastated by these closures. That's not a price worth paying for the sake of a few extra jobs in Glasgow. If anyone should know about prices, Mr Deputy Speaker, it's an employee of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. Sadly, it seems that their superiors know very little about value.
The